Good afternoon. This will be the second half of Genesis chapter 19. And it's got some very important lessons for us as believers. And all of this does, but this in particular. So Lord, I pray that you would help me, Lord, to speak your word. Prepare the hearts for anybody listening. That, Lord, we would hear what you want us to hear, that we would learn what needs to be learned. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. So, I titled this one, Don't Look Back, because Lot's wife looks back and it goes badly. So it came to pass, in verse 17, when they had brought them outside, that he said, Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. And in verse 22, they go on, Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Simple instructions. Flee, don't look back. Hurry. Salvation is similarly simple. Flee from temptation. Take up your cross. Deny yourself. Die to yourself daily. Don't let the flesh have power. Follow Jesus and hurry. You don't want to be the guy who says, oh, I'm going to wait till I'm older. I've still got living to do right now. And then you die before you get older. You're going to make sure that if you feel the call of God on you, that you hurry, and you obey, and you answer. Now, in this little bit right here, we see God's protection. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown write that the ruin of Sodom was suspended until he was secure. What care God does take of his people. In Revelation 7:3, he goes on, what a proof of the love which God bore to a good, though weak man. And that's a huge comfort. What proof of the love which God bears to this good but weak man. I do my best. And I'm glad that while it's not enough, it's not up to me. God still loves me. Revelation 7:3 tells us, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. In Revelation, we see all of God's people as witnesses that are left behind. They're not allowed, the angels aren't allowed to pour out their bowls until God's servants have been sealed on their foreheads. God can't pour out his wrath without first protecting his people. Now it says, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now first I want to touch on some evidence. I always love when I'm looking up information about things that I'm reading in the Bible and I get evidence coming from people who aren't even necessarily trying to prove the Bible. Philip J. Silva was the director of scientific analysis at the Tal el-Hammam excavation project in Jordan. He was leading a group of interdisciplinary scientists as they were trying to figure out why this area had a booming population, growth, everything, and all of a sudden everybody's abandoned it. And so in their excavations, they found an area where the buildings were suddenly destroyed. The walls were blasted away, leaving only the stone foundations. The walls were likely made of mud and clay. And so when whatever cataclysm happened, they weren't as strong as the stone foundation. It's blown away. They found potsherds from the society that lived there. They were superheated high enough to turn into glass. We're looking at least 8 to 12,000 degrees, potentially as hot as the surface of the sun. And this cataclysm would have left the area uninhabitable for at least 600 years. And there are many who believe that the southern end of the Dead Sea is actually where Sodom and Gomorrah actually were located. Because the sea goes from being 1,400 feet deep at the northern end to the southern end, it's like 100 feet deep. 14 feet deep, actually, I think. And so there's belief that that's where the cities used to be. But they compared it. They said that whatever happened would have been similar to the Tunguska event that happened in Siberia in 1908. When a meteor came through the atmosphere, and it was big enough that it didn't just burn up on entry. It made it all the way down to above Tunguska in Siberia, where then, because it was so hot from being superheated by the atmosphere, it exploded. And when it did, it took out a huge area, just completely flattened the trees. So the trees, it exploded here, the trees are in a radial pattern away from it. They compare this to that event, saying that it would have been as big or bigger to have blown away all the cities, all the buildings, turned potsherds into glass. And as we just read in the first half of this chapter, the cities were reduced to ashes. It takes a lot of heat to reduce buildings to ashes, or for that matter, people to ashes. Even in cremation, there's still chunks of bone and other stuff left behind. Everything, even vegetation, was destroyed. Now God, when He destroys an area, He doesn't go halfway, He goes all the way. And a lot of people will look at it and say, well, isn't that cruel? Just because they did this to destroy an entire people, this whole area? No. God can be hard. He can be harsh at times. But that's in defense of His righteousness. He gave the people chances. He gave them opportunity. David Guzik writes that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah saw more of the power, grace, and mercy of God than any of the other people of the region. They had been delivered from ruin by God's work through Abraham. Remember when the confederation of 4 kings of the north came and carried off all the people and all their stuff. And Abraham, with his 300 fighting men, came up against them and rescued everybody, brought everybody and their stuff back. They heard the testimony from Melchizedek and saw the example of Melchizedek and Abraham. And Jesus Himself had actually made a visit to the area. These people weren't just out on their own. They had no chance to know God. They had had opportunities. They had had examples, witness. And they rejected God. They rejected Him vehemently. They rejected Him violently. And so was it cruel? It was not cruel. It was a righteous judgment from a righteous God from people who had rejected Him. Now Lot's wife, when she looked back on the life that she was leaving behind, the life that she had, the life that she loved. The word is nabat. Hey. It means it's a primitive, which means to scan. It means to look intently at. By implication, to regard with pleasure, favor, or care. And my old 73 Ford truck, I love that truck. It's beat up, it's ugly, the paint is the original paint, worn through in some spots, surface rust coming through, all easily fixable. 2 big dents on the passenger side, brown and yellow. I love that truck. When it used to run, every time I park, I'd look back on it with favor, with pleasure, with care. I love the way it looks. It's just an old truck that looks like an old truck. It's not fancy. It is exactly what it is, and I love it. But that's how Lot's wife looked back on Sodom. Looking back at the favorable memories, the pleasures of living in this wealthy city. Jesus tells us about her. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life will preserve it. She was looking back, trying to remember her life, trying to hold on to it. And instead of holding on to her old life, she lost her life. When God gets a hold of you, he brings you into a new life. Don't linger. Don't look back on the old life. As the old hymnal, I'm a new creation. I'm a brand new man. Old things have passed away. I've been born again. Much more than a conqueror, that's what I am. I'm a new creation. That's what I am. When God gets a hold of you and he makes you a new creation, holding on to the old one can destroy your life. And so the warning of Jesus from Pastor Chuck, remember Lot's wife. Turning back to the world, seeking to save the old life of the world will only destroy you. But he who will lose his life, Jesus said, the same will destroy it. Don't lose what God has given you because you can't let go of what's behind. She was transformed into a pillar of salt. So, I have a few points on what life is like as a pillar of salt. It's my first attempt at being one of those cool pastors that has an alliteration, 3 points, all start with the same letter, so, moving up. First point, it leaves you immobile. You can't move forward while looking back. If I'm going forwards, I'm walking forwards, but I'm looking behind me, I'm going to trip and fall over every little thing in my way. But even more so, Hebrews chapter 12, 1 and 2. Says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And we're not called to be stagnant. We're in a race. We need to keep our focus on Christ and run our race with endurance. If I'm running and I'm looking back behind me to see what everybody else back there is doing, to see what I've left behind me, I'm going to slow down my run. I'm going to stumble. Somebody else is going to pass me. If you're driving your car down the highway and you're always looking in your mirror, staring at your mirror, what's that guy back there doing? What's going on? But you're not looking ahead, then the guy in front of you is going to stop and you're going to rear end him because you weren't looking ahead. We need to be able to run. We need to be able to run that race with endurance. We need to be running looking unto Jesus, because he is the one that we need to keep our focus on. He went to the cross with joy, not because the cross is going to be a pleasant experience, but because the benefit, because of what him going to the cross did for us, brought him joy. Keep your eyes on him. Move forwards in your life. Grow. Speaking of growing, a pillar of salt is inanimate. It's dead. You can't grow in God while looking backwards. If you're looking back at your old life and not looking at Jesus, you can't grow. Colossians 2:19 tells us, and they are not connected to Christ, the head of the body, for he holds the body together with its joints and ligaments, and it grows as God nourishes it. If you're living apart from Christ, if you aren't connected to him, if you aren't connected to the head, you don't take in nourishment. If you don't take in nourishment, you don't grow, you die. The word pillar is nasib, which can also be translated to mean statue. A statue looks like you, but it's not you. It looks like you, but it's dead. It looks like you, but it's incomplete. It has no spirit. It has no soul. If you don't live in connection to Jesus, if you don't live in connection to Christ, you're not in connection to the Spirit. You are inanimate. You don't have your spirit. You are incomplete. You need that connection to the head. You need that connection to Jesus Christ because he is our connection to God. And it is God where our nourishment comes from, where our growth comes from. So if you're running a race, you're not looking forwards, you're not looking to Christ, you're not connected to Christ, you're going to stumble, you're going to fall, you're not going to grow, you're not going to be nourished. And not only will you not grow, but you can't grow fruit and salt because you're going to be infertile. We're called to grow in the fruits of the Spirit. We should want to develop the fruits of the Spirit. But if we're looking backwards, if we're still stuck on our old life, we're not going to grow those fruits. Galatians 5:22 through 23 lists those fruits for us. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against these things, there is no law. Or against such, there is no law. So if you are a pillar of salt, if you're disconnected from God, if you're not looking towards him, if you're not growing, then neither is the fruit of the Spirit. You can't bear fruit if you're salt. Those fruits, love, is agape. Agape love is not a sentimental, sweet kind of love. It's not an emotion. It's not affectionate. It's a choice. If I have agape love for you, then it means I love you. Full stop. I don't love you when you're kind. I don't love you when you do things for me. I just love you. My love for you is a choice that I make no matter how I feel about you. This is something that this world is in desperate need of. When you look at the hatred just from our political parties, you can have people who choose not to love you because you hold the wrong view on politics. You look at the divorce rate, and I'm not even specifying in the world because the divorce rate in the church is just as high. Because we choose not to love each other. Here's the thing. If we have agape love, you can be an absolute jerk to me. You can call me every name in the book. I'm still going to love you. It's a choice to put others first and to sacrifice ourselves on their behalf. And we look at what Jesus did. He endured the cross for the joy that lay ahead. We know he did not want to go to that cross. He even asked the Lord, if this cup may pass from me, then please, Lord, let this cup pass. But if not, then let your will be done and not mine. If I am the first to rush in and grab food every time that there's a buffet or a potluck, or I got to make sure that I get the best of everything, am I showing love? I'm not. This kind of love can only come through God's power. We move on to joy. It's chara. Joy is not happiness. Your happiness is dependent upon your situation. Everything's going great, I'm happy. Joy is dependent on God. In Philippians 2, 1 through 4, Paul associates complete joy with fellowship and peace in the body of Christ. It's the result of a right relationship with God. If I have a right relationship with God, then I know that all things work for the good of those who love the Lord, are called according to his purpose. And so if I get a flat tire on the way into work, I can have joy that A, I was able to safely pull over to fix my tire. B, I got AAA if I really need it. C, there must have been something ahead that God is slowing me down for to protect me. Or there might even be an opportunity, if I do call AAA, to witness to the guy that comes out. We can have joy in any situation. And that's what's going to draw people to want to know the Lord. When a bad thing happens to you, do you despair or do you maintain joy? Because people don't like to be despairing. They don't like to be sad. We like happiness. We like joy. And if we can tell them how they can maintain their joy through all situations, then we can draw them into the Lord. Peace means everything good within relationships. Harmony, friendliness, safety, order, rest, and contentment. 1 Corinthians 3:3 asserts that the opposite, strife, is from the flesh. So if strife is from the flesh, then peace is from the Spirit. Peace goes hand in hand with joy. Because if I can have joy in every situation, that brings peace to me. And if I'm peaceful, if I'm not striving, if I'm not worried or frightened or full of stress, that brings with it patience or long suffering. It doesn't mean that I'm able to stand in line for a long time and not get angry. It means that I can be long suffering in the face of persecution or abuse. It means that when somebody is mistreating me, I don't suddenly fly off the handle into a rage. I don't just run away and try and get away from them. Just because it means that I try and find a way that I can share the Lord with them. Kindness. Kindness is it's got a different meaning here than what we really think of. Because yes, nice is good. We should be nice to people. We should be kind to people. But kindness brings with it more responsibility than niceness. Because if I see somebody and they're walking off a cliff, or they're about to walk off a cliff and they're on their phone or they're blindfolded or whatever reason they don't see it, and I say, the only thing I can do is run over and grab them and tackle them so they don't walk off the edge. But I say, well, I don't want to, knock them on the ground. That's not very nice. Am I going to just let them walk off that cliff? No. What this means for us is to be kind is you do what you have to do to save people. You don't let them just walk off that cliff because you don't want to get involved. It's the moral goodness and integrity required to know the right course of action and the strength to choose it. Because it's not always easy. It's not easy to see somebody who's living their life in sin, and you're seeing them make all these bad decisions, and they're wondering, why is everything so difficult in my life? Why is this going wrong? What have I really done wrong? And you can look and say, well, a lot of things. According to the Bible, you're wrong here and here and here. And these are the natural consequences when we don't live according to God's commands, according to God's will, according to God's law. It's hard to go up and tell somebody that. But if that's what it takes, if you have to hurt their feelings a little bit to get them to see the truth, then that's what it takes. And this doesn't mean that this is not an invitation to just go out and be a jerk for Jesus. Nobody wants that. You should always be operating in love. That's why love comes before this. If you have to hurt somebody's feelings, you should do so lovingly. You should do so because you genuinely care that they get better. Not because you just want to go, it's going to show them. You need to show true kindness. Now, goodness is kindness with an edge. It's the ability to do the right thing even if it's hard. Sharing the gospel can be hard sometimes because share it with people that don't believe, which is who you should be sharing the gospel with. A lot of them are going to make fun of you. Oh, you believe in that fairy tale? That crutch of the masses? I don't need that. I'm strong on my own, you wimp. Well, to be good, you need to be able to put that pride, that ego down and share the gospel. Do what's right, even though it's going to be difficult. It means God, as the good shepherd, sometimes he has to break your leg to keep you from running away, to force you to stay close to him. Because when a shepherd, at least in the old days, when a shepherd would have a sheep that kept on wandering astray, sometimes he would take that sheep, he'd break its leg, and then with that sheep having the broken leg, he'd have to carry the sheep everywhere they went. So the sheep would always be there with the shepherd, hearing the shepherd's voice, being carried by the shepherd, being cared for by the shepherd, and that make that sheep love the shepherd and want to stay close to the shepherd even after he was able to run away again. And you might say, well, that's really rough. But when you're out, and this is, in the old days, they didn't have, fenced in areas and all that. There's lions, there's wolves, there's bears, there's all kinds of predators that will take your sheep. And if that sheep wanders off, who do you think is going to get picked? Not the sheep that's in the middle of the herd, but the sheep that's off on its own. That's who gets picked. And so it may not seem like a nice thing to do, but it's a good thing to do because it keeps that sheep from dying. Temporary pain brings about life. Now on to faithfulness. This is not loyalty or dependability. It's not, oh, he's a good, faithful guy. You can trust him. This is being faithful to God specifically. It means acknowledging his word, believing in him, surrendering to him. When we possess the fruit of faithfulness, we're full of faith and trust in God. It means that when God tells you go out and do this, we go out and we do it because we know that whatever God tells us to do is for our good. He has a plan. It's part of his will, and we want to be a part of it. Gentleness refers not only to actions or attitudes towards others, because we should be gentle towards others, but also to the spiritual condition of meekness, of submission towards God. It comes from a position of strength. It is submission and grace without concern for one's own rights. Now you may say, how is that a position of strength to say, well, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. I won't worry about my rights. What's the first thing that most of us want to do? Especially us, big, strong men. We want to fight for our rights. We want to defend our rights. You can't tell me that. You can't do this to me. You can't take this from me. I don't got to take this from you. Where does that come from? And for sure it does not come from God. What did Jesus say when they came to take his life? He gave it willingly. When Peter tried to defend him, cut off the guy's ear, what did Jesus do? He told Peter to put away his sword, and he fixed the guy's ear. When the government comes and tells me they're going to take away my guns, or they're going to take away this right or that right that's enshrined in the Constitution, what am I going to do about that? As long as it doesn't affect the rights that God has given me, as long as it doesn't affect what God has commanded me to do, okay. At least that's what I say while it's not happening, but that should be our attitude, though. This whole business with COVID, with wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, getting a vaccine, not getting a vaccine, it's brought out a lot of ugliness in the church, where we have people threatening violence because somebody tells them to wear a mask. Christians, there's a pastor I saw, a pastor who was told to put on a mask while inside this bakery back in the midst of everything. And he came out and recorded a video talking about how he wished that he could have jumped over the counter and just started beating the guy up. You're a pastor. You're the example. Our rights. Lay down your rights. Where does the strength in that come from? The strength in that is because our flesh. It's our flesh that commands us to stand up for our rights, to defend our rights. And it takes strength to push that flesh down, to let the Spirit have control, to do what does not come naturally to us as humans. Naturally, the flesh rules us. Naturally, we're going to die. We need to let the Spirit have control. We need to push that flesh out. We need to fill ourselves with the Spirit, and that takes strength. Which leads us to the final fruit, self-control. It can also only be manifested through strength, because if you're pushing down your flesh, what does that require you to have? It requires you to have self-control. The root word, enkrateia, implies a robust power, mastery, and restraining. None of these things are natural to us. All of them are the result of the Spirit working in us. If we let the Spirit work in us, then we can achieve these fruits. We can exhibit these fruits in our lives. And if we give ourselves to the Spirit and we strive to live righteous lives, our righteousness can be a covering for those around us. Lot's righteousness is what got his wife and his 2 daughters out with him. Abraham's righteousness is what got Lot out of there. If I'm leading a righteous life, I can provide a covering over the people around me, and that they will start to kind of question me, will start to look into the things of God themselves even. But it doesn't save you eternally. That covering is just a shield from judgment until your time is up. Salvation still is a personal choice. I can't be a good, righteous person and everybody around me gets into heaven because of that. No, the only way they get into heaven is if they also choose God. So Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw and behold the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So Abraham went back to where he had last met the Lord. And it was immediately evident to him that there were indeed not 10 righteous within the city of Sodom. But it says that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out. Abraham's righteousness led to Lot being sent out of the cities. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown tells us this is most welcome and instructive after so painful a narrative. It shows that God is a consuming fire to the wicked. He is the friend of the righteous. He remembered the intercessions of Abraham, and what confidence should not this give us that he will remember the intercessions of a greater than Abraham in our behalf. And this was a painful narrative. We tend to look back and say, well, Sodom and Gomorrah, come on. They're wicked. They're full of sin. They had every chance. They earned it. They deserved to be destroyed. And yes, that is true. But it misses the whole point. It misses God's heart on the matter. God was not happy to do it. God did it because he had to do it. Because he is just, because he is righteous, and because they were everything but that. We look at them and we say, yeah, they were sinful. They deserve destruction. But we forget, what are we? What am I? We also are sinful and also deserve destruction. But Abraham interceded on their behalf, and they would have been saved had there been but 10 righteous. Well, we have Jesus interceding on our behalf. And we don't even have to be righteous. We have to choose the Lord. We have to accept his plan. We have to accept his salvation. We are saved by grace through faith in Jesus. And when he intercedes on our behalf, Satan might be up there and say, well, look what Justin just did. He just sinned right there. And Jesus says, I've already paid for that. It's okay. He repented and accepted the payment. So we may see God being a consuming fire, destroying the wicked. But on the other hand, we see him being a friend to the righteous and saving him out of that destruction. So then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And this guy, he begged to be able to go to Zoar and not into the mountains. He begged these angels because he was afraid he'd die in the mountains. Gets to Zoar, he's afraid to stay in Zoar, so he goes to the mountains. He and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. The firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come in to us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. They were just in Zoar. They just saw a whole city survived. So I don't know what the daughters are talking about. There's no one on earth to come into us because they just saw a city, and I'm sure there must have been men in that city. But this is an example of why we need to leave behind our old lives, why we need to be careful of what influences we allow. And it happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also. The younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus, both the daughters of Lot were a child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So, just right off the bat, we have a caution here about drunkenness. You don't get drunk. You get drunk, you might do something you regret. Because there's a reason why they said, let's make him drink wine and then lay with him. They knew that he would never go along with it, where he awake and sober. But get him so drunk that he doesn't even notice it happening. Don't get drunk. But the Bible doesn't tell us that we can't have alcohol, period, but it does tell us to be sober-minded and to not be drunk. And as I said, it shows us the effect of our influences, of what we allow in. He and his family lived in a pit of corruption. We don't know where his wife was from. We don't know if she had been with Lot from the beginning, from when they first left, from where they first settled, or if she came out of Sodom herself. But we do know that they lived in Sodom for quite a while. His daughters grew up in Sodom. His daughters have no faith. It's an example of us using our wisdom instead of God's. They don't have faith in God, so therefore they use their own wisdom. And it was wrong. They're morally corrupt. But also, it's a reminder for us, those who are parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, whoever. We need to be sure that we're taking care of our kids and our grandkids, all the kids around us, as they're coming up. We need to make sure, because we live in a pretty sinful world these days, we need to make sure that they don't get corrupted the way that his daughters were. We need to be a strong example of godliness. Husbands, fathers, this is a heavy weight placed on you. If you are a husband, if you are a father, it is on you to be the spiritual guide, the spiritual leader of your household. A lot of men these days fall down. Shouldn't be like that. Lot failed his family. Look what happened. You may not find yourself in the same situation that he was in, but if you don't lead your family is going to suffer for it. Lot lost his wife because of his lack of leadership, and now his two daughters are committing an abomination of their own. We need to make sure that our children, they have a solid foundation in Christ. And fathers, it's a big part of that is on you. Your studies have shown that even when mom is at church every Sunday, bringing the kids every Sunday, if dad doesn't go, there's a lot less likelihood that the kids are going to grow up and just remain in their faith. And we also see here how often sexual sin is at play. It's Satan's favorite weapon, his most effective weapon against us. Back in Genesis 6, what led to the flood? It was the angels forgetting their proper abode, coming down and laying with the daughters of men. What led to Ishmael, Isaac's older brother, who would eventually become his greatest enemy. It was Abram and Sarah having Abram have a child by Hagar, not his wife. The people of Sodom, that was the last big sin before God rained destruction on them. And now Lot's daughters. And what comes out of that? Two of Israel's enemies. David Guzik writes, Lot's life ended in ruin, past, present, and future, all because of his love for the world. What has been a recurring theme? Even when I mess up, even when Lot here messes up, God can still use our mistakes, our failures, our faults to accomplish his will, because you'll notice one of the kids is named Moab, father of the Moabites. And as we go further into the Bible, we're going to meet one famous Moabite. Her name was Ruth. And she ends up becoming a part of Jesus' lineage. One of the very few women who actually is mentioned in Jesus' lineage. So, God is faithful. We need to match his faithfulness. or at least do our best to try. We need to make sure that as we are going forwards, if we are being faithful, that means that we will be a strong example of godliness and righteousness to the people around us, to our children, to our spouses, to our parents even, to the people at work, our friends. And we can find ourselves in a position where we can save people from a lot of heartache. So that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that our heritage our legacy doesn't go down in ruins because we failed to step up. So Lord, I pray right now that you would give us boldness, give us strength to be able to go out and speak to people on your word, to live our lives according to your word. That Lord, when people around us do things that we know that we shouldn't do, that we would not do those things, that we would stand on your word rather than in fear of what the people around us think. Help us, Lord, to just be a strong light so that people who look at us, who see our lives, will see you. And that we can bring people to come to know you, Lord. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.